In the program Current Affairs, now we bring you a discussion on outcome of Prime Minister's visit to Russia and China. The participants are Veena Sikri, former diplomat, Professor Anuradha Chenoy, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Manoj Tulli, AIR correspondent, and Sunil Shukla, AIR correspondent, who initiates and moderates the discussion.
We are going to discuss on the just concluded visits of Prime Minister to Russia and China and the outcome of Prime Minister's visit. Madam Sikri, I would like to know, Prime Minister has expressed satisfaction over his outcome of his visits of the two nations. What is your reaction?
I think the fact that the visits took place is very important. For example, with Russia, it is now a practice to have an annual summit meeting between our Prime Minister and President of Russia. This is a very positive sign that this practice is being maintained, and I think President Putin himself has done a lot to revive the relationship between Russia and India that after 1991 has really gone into some kind of a slump. And I think that it is very positive that the visit could take place and the discussions took place. Of course, some of the outcomes, as we know, could not be as per the interest and the keenness of both sides, Kulam Kulam and so on. But I think that at this point, the fact of the visit having taken place, the interest that our Prime Minister spoke this time in a very, very strong and emphatic way about the traditional relationships between Russia and India. And here, when we talk about traditional, he's not only talking about relationships in the post-1917 revolution period, but he's going back to the Tsarist period. In fact, some of the gifts given by President Putin show those special coins and so on. So it's now being recognized as one of our civilizational relationships. And I think this could be very positive for the future if we are able to implement many of the ideas and if the people of Russia are able to now once again realize the importance and accept the value of a traditional and good relationship with India, that would be very good. Because after 1991, the look west policy of Russia is so strong, it is still very difficult. But now we have cooperation through BRICS, we have cooperation in sub-regional, multi-regional and international fora. These are very good. I think the visit to China, is very significant, and perhaps in India it was the one visit which was watched very closely. There are 5 aspects in the visit with China, I think, that need to be brought out very clearly, and these are the 5 aspects which have been there as, if you can call them, irritants or difficulties in the relationship. 3 of them, I think, were touched upon publicly and openly. 2 have not come in the public forum but were there. The 3 that are very direct are the ones, the situation along the border. This has always been one of the big issues in India-China relationship. Peace and tranquility along the border is something that India has emphasized. There have been agreements on this going back to 1993, but this time also a border defense cooperation agreement was signed, which is very positive. It reiterates the non-use of force. It goes beyond in significant ways in bringing together the militaries of the two countries, having flag meetings at the command level, at the local level, no tailing of patrols, and then even meeting of the annual defense dialogue and meetings at other levels of the military, which is very good. But again, this does not yet talk anything about the border. It talks about the line of actual control in India-China area. But what is this? Nobody knows. So this is one area. Second area of difficulty is the trade imbalance, which has been mentioned
between India and China.
Between India and China, a very important area of difference, because
but there is also a major issue between India and Russia about enhancement in the trade between both the countries.
Yes, that also is there between India and Russia, but there I think because of cooperation in other sectors, you find that it does not acquire that big aspect does with China. And I think in China our problem is also export of raw materials to China, which is a big difficulty from our side. Even if you don't worry about the trade imbalance as such, I think it's the content of the trade that is a matter of worry, and we should be looking at IT and pharmaceutical sectors for which we still don't have answers from them. We should be looking at value added. Why iron ore export? Send value added products which China may need for their industry. So trade imbalance is the one. The third one is the river waters, which is very significant and one that we are very worried about. There has been an agreement on stronger cooperation in the trans-border river area, but again, there is no mention about India's concern on what is it that China is doing, which are the projects they are building, what are the names of the projects, how will it affect the flows. So this aspect is not mentioned, and this certainly needs to be taken up. These are the 3 direct areas. The 2, shall I say, elephants in the room but not mentioned directly are China-Pakistan relations, which are a matter of great concern, and not only Chinese activities in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, but also China-Pakistan nuclear cooperation, which is kind of an undeclared, under-the-table cooperation which China as a member of the NSG should really not be doing, which is, both these things. And that China has never criticized the Taliban. They have always kept quiet on the Taliban because they are so worried about the relationship with Pakistan. They are worried about Uyghurs, certainly, about the Xinjiang region, but still they give Pakistan every benefit of doubt. And the last area in India-China relations is, of course, the staple visas. And the implication, when you give a staple visa for anybody from Arunachal or Kashmir, the implication that you are not accepting these regions as a part of India, this is a very serious, major item of sincere and deep concern to India. Again, the visa agreement could not be signed because of this.
But Prime Minister has said that this issue was discussed at summit level talks and at the national level talks.
Yes.
And India has also said that it will carry this issue at all levels.
Both on these issues, Pakistan and the staple visas, our Prime Minister and other Foreign Secretary and others have said they were discussed, but they don't find mention anywhere. The other three issues are there mentioned.
Yes. Even this issue was not mentioned in the joint declaration also.
Yes.
Madam Professor Chinnoy, there is a big issue between India and Russia over trade. Only as per the latest data, $11 billion trade is being held between both the countries. What do you think? It was the 14th summit level talk and 5th time at Moscow and 10th time Dr. Manmohan Singh attended the summit. This is a very good relationship with political leaders of Russia. Our Prime Minister will help in the increasing of this trade.
Problem with trade between India and Russia has a history. When at the time of the Soviet period it was handled completely by the Soviet state. And then they had to make the transition when the Soviet state collapsed from trade being held by the state to private control. And then there was a rise of the Russian mafia, there were not proper laws, the banking system was in a mess, the rupee-ruble trade, India had a lot of rubles which they didn't know how to use, they didn't know how to peg the balance between the rupee and ruble, the exchange rate. So there were a lot of teething problems with trade, so trade declined, and Indian business, which is now to do the trade, didn't have the confidence to do trade with Russia, and also there have been problems about their banking system, their financial laws, the way their monopolies and the capitalism in market has grown in Russia. However, both the states, especially since 2000, have put specific focus on it, where both sides are saying they are going to put emphasis on it, and this relation between India and Russia, which had boiled down mainly to defense imports and strategic partnership, should also now be more balanced with trade. Now there are various ways out of it. One is that it is in the making that they will sign a free trade agreement in which it is possible that trade will increase. The second is, if you see trade between Russia and China, there also they had problems, but they have overcome it in a major way, and trade between Russia and China is now 100 billion. It's 83 billion this year, moving to 100 billion in the next 2 years. And part of that trade is done in the yuan and ruble, 1/3 of it almost, 20-30%. Just like we said in the BRICS Bank, that the developing and emerging countries should have now trade and a bank in which they deal with their local currency, Russia and China have already started that. Part of it is still in dollars. So I think India has to, and Russia, both of them together, have to creatively look at how they can expand trade in the sectors in which India is also strong, and they can penetrate the Russian market, whether it is already there in pharmaceuticals, tea, etc., in the service sectors. And I think this intergovernmental organization that they have got of technical cooperation and trade, that is looking into it. And last year, from 2012 to 13, there was a rise in almost 25 to 30%. So if that continues, then maybe this trade deficit and the confidence that private sector and the market have with each other has to be rebuilt, because they're both emerging and re-emerging countries. They're both doing much better than the West. They are engaging in many organizations like BRICS and G20. They have no conflict of interest, unlike India has with, let's say, even China. And therefore, this sector really should be doing much better than it is.
What are the prospects of a gas pipeline from Russia to India?
No, the prospects are there, and the talks have been going on that, on two issues. One on the North-South corridor, on which Russia is very keen. On the pipeline also, there have been 2 or 3 proposals. One has been the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline, which will also, with Turkmenistan, they have a gas swap deal with Russia. Earlier there was talk of the Russia, Iran, Pakistan, India pipeline. Then now there is talk of a direct pipeline. So they have to finalize the routes and also this pipeline, because Russia and India, the pipeline will cross over areas.
This is a big
so they
problem.
have to have a security. Russia has to ensure the security of the pipeline. I think with Russia at least, as Veena ji already said, everything is in process. It is not that there is going to be one breakthrough, suddenly something is signed. There are no problems also, but everything is going to be a negotiated deal in which external issues, bilateral issues and domestic issues are also involved.
In the hydrocarbon field, both countries are engaged for a long time, even for the exploration also. But in this visit, nothing happened substantive. Is there any prospect, do you think?
Yes, you see, earlier there was a big spurt because ONGC Videsh signed on Sakhalin 1. Then there was a proposal to invest in Sakhalin 2 and 3. Then Russia has invested in Bay of Bengal. So these are also ongoing. But I agree that in the last 2-3 years, instead of moving further, like China has succeeded in having a direct pipeline between Russia and China, and Russia has become biggest exporter of oil and gas to China. But India has not been able to do that mainly because of pipeline routes. And what they have to do is, I think they have to invest in the Siberian oil fields, in which ONGC Videsh has been doing explorations, but somehow it's all still in process where insurance issues, company issues, stakes issues, who will own how much, all these issues are still being sorted out. But I think these really need to go ahead.
Yeah, I think China has been much more aggressive.
One thing about Russia, this Karakoram nuclear project, Indian diplomats are quite hopeful that
for Unit 3 and 4,
some will also be finalized. But nothing substantial has come out in the joint declaration. But both the leaders have said that they are committed to implement the agreement which was done previous years for the civil use of nuclear power. What do you think?
You see, the problem is that India has now a very rigorous nuclear liability bill which the Parliament has passed. So the operator, the person who delivers this, is liable for any accident. Now this bill was not there during when we negotiated Kudankulam 1 and 2. And in fact, when the US had put sanctions, Russia had said that you take the third and fourth engines also, but at that time India had obeyed the sanctions and not accepted. Now there is a liability bill, which means they need an insurance. They need to see, and all those suppliers, whether it's Russia, France, America, they're all nervous of how much liability will they have to pay. They have to come to a settled amount because it can be huge. It can destroy a country. And then there is also movements over here which oppose it. And those who invest, the local people try and stop that land transfer which is necessary. So there are a lot of issues, but mainly both the states are interested. But at the same time, they have to take into account the liability clause, the insurance clause, because GIC has said they would stand insurance, but the amount, so all this takes time. And it is believed that they will overcome it, because that was what was indicated in the talks, that they are likely to go ahead, but they need to iron out some of these minor differences which are also extremely important.
Madam, when I met the Indian ambassador to Russia, he said, why only the Kudankulam? There could be even more nuclear power projects for India, in which India and Russia can collaborate. There could be even more. So I think they should explore more such projects.
Actually, on the roadmap which was drawn up a couple of years ago, because every year there is this annual summit, in the roadmap they had drawn up 30 projects. But they have to demarcate where they have to be located, they have to get land acquisition. There are a lot of steps. The nuclear power, NPCIL has to go through a lot of paperwork, and so does a Russian counterpart. So it is not so easy to do, especially in the context of Fukushima and others, where there is a discussion on nuclear power.
Yeah, once the Russian concerns are settled about our liability law or such things, I think more projects will also come.
I don't think so. I would not give much hope for more nuclear projects, because the entire scene, the scene in India for additional nuclear power projects is not very bright at all. In fact, even right now for Kudankulam 3 and 4, the whole aspect of state liability. But even state liability, what does it mean? And the more that this Fukushima trauma is continuing and not resolving itself despite Japan's huge financial, technical and scientific capabilities, the more I think that we have to look at other methods, other dimensions of collaboration with Russia, which will bring in more their private sector, big business tycoons who have so far not even hardly looked at India, really. It will take time, but I think that if we have attractive foreign investment regimes, you could have, because actually there is even in the energy cooperation, we have to look at trilateral, quadrilateral, the swap deals. In the old system, in the Russia, Soviet Union system, we had a lot of swap deals with Iraq, I remember, at that time. And they worked very well because Russia had its own deals with these countries, and so these countries could work with India.
You think that nothing substantial will happen in the field of nuclear power projects?
I don't see anything happening in the next 6 to 8 months, that's first of all. Then after
first we have Unit 3 and 4.
For even in Unit 3 and 4, this whole issue of course today it is dormant, the whole public demand, but in the perspective of energy planning, what place will India give to nuclear power projects? Certainly, I think if you see the situation as it was in UPA 1 and the high prospective place for civilian nuclear energy in the Vision 2020 for energy, it was a much higher one. I don't think it's that high today. I don't think it's going to retain that special position, civilian nuclear energy, because of all the developments in the last 6 to 8 years. And if that happens, you have to see a different energy basket emerging in India and in India's collaboration with other countries.
But during the summit talks and delegation level talks, Russian leadership shown a very encouraging approach towards Indian diplomats. Even Vladimir Putin, breaking his years-long protocol traditions, he met Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, offered a Mughal period coin. Diplomats in Russia told that it never happened in the past.
I think both sides wanted to show that India-Russia relations are historic, they are civilizational, that there is no conflict, that there should be confidence that even there is no issue on which they actually disagree, and especially in the context of the NATO and ISAF troops going away from Afghanistan. The common enemy of both is the Taliban, which other countries are not seeing. The US and Pakistan are going ahead to do a deal with the Taliban. In that, Russia-India strategic partnership is going to be very important in the next few years.
I think on this whole issue of counterterrorism and the issue of global terrorism, I think the difference in the approach of Russia and China is very stark. I mean, the whole issue of Afghanistan, as Professor Chinoy mentioned, is one on which India and Russia are on the same wavelength. But for China, although they do, as we all know, they have a very serious internal problem in the field of fundamentalist terrorism in the Xinjiang province, but because of the relationship with Pakistan, they're not able to bring this into a common position with India. And they have not even taken a public position on the Taliban yet. So you see this stark difference. It's a very important point for India and Russia to come together on in the coming years. I think it's a very important point of our strategic cooperation. And whereas with China, the strategic cooperation is there, but if anything happens along the border, the staple visas issue is still on the cards. If anything happens along the border, you will immediately have a setback. Whereas in Russia, if both sides work together with great strength...
But in the joint statements issued at Moscow and Beijing, all three countries committed that they are ready to address this menace of terrorism, share the intelligence information, and cooperate with each other.
China, for the first time, there was a mention that I think our Prime Minister was insistent upon it, in which that is why it came in the joint declaration that terrorism is a problem and China is also concerned about it. But Veena ji is right that earlier they were not taking a public position because they did not want to, they were using Pakistan in various ways. But this time I think because there have been explosions with the Uyghurs and this problem continues and it's really irking the Chinese, they are taking a position and they're saying yes, that any time China faces a problem, whether it's on the question of rivers between India or on the question of Tibet, they withdraw from this issue. So we have to hold them accountable.
That's why there is a rise in defense collaboration between the two countries, between India and Russia.
Collaboration has been very strong for decades actually.
But now it's on the rise, as we see, apart from the INS Vikramaditya. Now we have deal also on the, as you were saying, on the submarine, on the nuclear submarine.
But on the other hand, Russia has expressed concern that we have stronger deals with other countries coming up. So they see that as infringing on the traditional India-Russia defense collaboration that has been so strong. So it's both ways. I think it comes out both ways. So, it is an issue in the global forefront, but that global prominence does not come out in the bilateral India-China list of concern issues.
I think we have to hold them accountable and it shouldn't just be summit to summit, but in between make sure about the implementation and have a report of how much it was all implemented.
Madam Sikri, agreement has been signed on border defense cooperation. Is it an additional confidence building measure to ensure the peace and tranquility on the border, or it is a major breakthrough? What do you think?
I think it builds upon previous agreements that have been there in this area, which beginning with 1993, these have been there. The importance of peace and tranquility on the border is uppermost, certainly in the Indian mind, and this is why we have always placed a lot of emphasis on it. But clearly, this agreement has tried to go beyond. It is perhaps a recognition that the earlier agreements were not so effective. Why were they not effective? I think one of the important reasons that came out, particularly in the events in April and May 2013 in the Depsang area of Ladakh, that, there was all this question, is the Chinese army doing it on its own? Is there a difference between the civilian and so on? This was a question which came up, and I think it was wrongly raised because ultimately the Chinese state is a very strong monolithic structure. So obviously that kind of thing was not. But I think through this agreement, the good point that has come out is that the defense collaborations have been strengthened. That means it's not only meetings at the border, but it's also between the command officers, the army command officer on the Indian side and say the regional command officer on the Chinese side. It is between the defense ministries. It's an annual defense dialogue. 4 or 5 different methods have been spelled out. But then nobody is still saying where is the LAC when there is a perception difference between India and China on the position of the line of actual control on the ground, and you have Chinese troops coming in and saying, but this is what we think is ours. So the BDCA, Border Defense Cooperation Agreement, tries to spell it out, saying that exercise maximum restraint, it says no use of force, it says not to have any kind of firing. Those are good points, good confidence building points, but the proof of the pudding will have to be to see whether there's any action on the ground. And secondly, I think, and this one has been a major concern for the Indian side, that based on some of the other earlier agreements, India's infrastructure development at the border along the LAC has not been as vigorous and active as it should have. I think this has been recognized, and it has also been recognized that whenever India has wanted to, they've taken some steps.
But it has been clarified, BDAC will not affect the development of infrastructure along the LAC.
Yes, but then you see,
China has also said it, that it will not affect.
Yes, but the point is we do know that right now, because there is a great disparity in the levels of infrastructure development, and much of what happened in April and May was attributed to the fact that India was not trying to play catch up and trying to do something, and this happened. So again it became a setback. So as I said, again the pudding will have to be in the eating to see if the border remains tranquil, if India continues with its infrastructure development as it was, the roads, the movement up to the border, especially in Arunachal. As we know that in Arunachal, in some areas, there is in fact a great lacunae on this front. So, and India's internal economic strength is another issue, because we have always seen that whenever India has had a period of economic stability and growth, with China you've had a good relationship. Whenever you've had setbacks on economic growth or difficulties on that sector, then you find that, China tries to assert or establish its supremacy in various areas. It may be on the border, it may be on trade, it may be on staple visas, various issues like that come up.
May we hope that after following the implementation of this BDAC, borders will be tranquil?
We hope so, but you can see that 1993 we had CBMs, in 2005 we had CBMs, in 2008 we had CBMs. We've had prime ministers going, and we've always thought there might be a breakthrough. The situation on India-China border is, it's no war, no peace. It's conflict management. So if the conflict is managed, and if some norms are established in which, let's say that 20 kilometers neither side comes, even if that is implemented, there might be peace and tranquility. But main thing is in how it will be implemented, and how both sides, especially the Chinese, will be.
But you can say that this new agreement has deepened the previous agreement.
Yes, I think it has brought to concern of both countries and the world that this issue is very important. And I think the details of the agreement are good, because it's comprehensive, it's brought it down. Certainly it's a good agreement, but it will have to be very carefully implemented without India letting up at all on its infrastructure development, both in Ladakh and in Arunachal Pradesh, and bringing the communication skill and ability up to the level that it should be. And that will enormously help the people living there, because it will give them economic prosperity, it will give them the strength.
Similarly, you can say that MOU to strengthen cooperation on trans-border rivers.
That's also a good process, because earlier there was just exchange of hydrological data in a few months, where China would say that this is how much water is being released because they are the upper riparian and India is the lower riparian. But for the first time, China has recognized the rights of the lower riparian states, And so they will give overall longer period of hydrological data. They'll also talk about the issue of floods, of excess water, of less water. So I think all these are, sort of steps which are moving towards a better understanding.
Like in the Rivers Cooperation Agreement, I think the aspect of not affecting the lower riparian flow, that is key. That is not mentioned anywhere. It is a question of hydrological data. So similarly, that kind of cooperation from China, which is an upper riparian in this case, I think that is an important aspect which India is looking forward to, because we do know that these constructions are taking place. Satellite imagery, after all, satellite surveillance is there from both sides. Both sides are doing it, and that is a known factor. So since the information is there, the next step of confidence building and mutual trust is to actually talk about what is happening, what is the description of the project, how big is it, what is the flow, because I think the matter of great concern for everybody in India is that we know that the Chinese government has a massive project of diversion of the southern rivers to the north. This is a very big project, very controversial, environmentally I think not at all accepted as being a sound proposition. But because of the shortfall in the northern rivers, the drying up of the northern rivers, China is going ahead with this.
Concluding the discussion, nothing has been said about the issue of staple visa and long-term visa for business community with the China.
And also about the trade deficit.
This is a controversial issue, and therefore India could not sign a visa agreement as the businessmen of both sides.
Is it in the interest of
good or bad? India had to do it. China is giving stapled visas to some of your citizens. Then India has to show some form of protest. So it was in the form of things that other things were signed. There were 9 agreements signed, but on this it was not. So India has to hold back until this issue is sorted out.
But what about long-term visa?
Long-term visa also
You don't think it should be resolved only?
It should be resolved. Of course it should be resolved, but I think China should also understand that they cannot just keep pushing. Both sides there has to be some amount of reciprocity, and China has to recognize they have to give proper visas to any citizen of India. If he has an Indian passport, why should he get a stapled visa? So I think that is a major issue, and it will get resolved. I think both sides do understand it, and that's what they have said, at least, that trade and economic interests of two developing countries is important. So let's hope it gets resolved.
Now, concluding on a positive note, as Chinese Premier has also said that now at least we can manage our differences better.
No, I think that these visits do have a very positive impact, but I think when we talk of managing the relationship, there are two issues simultaneously. One is that the issues on where you have a commonality, a good point, common shared perspective, whether it is trade or whether it is other issues like civilian nuclear power cooperation with Russia, then we should move ahead fast. So to give the feeling to the people of both countries that there are important factors in this friendship that are of mutual benefit interest. But while you're moving ahead on the positive issues, like you're moving ahead on trade with China, you have to give a strong attention to the concerns, and you cannot ignore the issues of concern. That is very important. By ignoring the issues of concern, it becomes unequal relationship, which in the end does not carry with the wishes of what the people of both the countries want. So I think this element of finding your mutually agreed areas, moving ahead strongly in that, discussing the areas of concern to one or the other in a very frank and open way. It may not come in the public domain, that's fine, but it should be there so that at least there's a very clear awareness of that. And respecting the security concerns of each side. This is important. I think security aspects are crucial for a stable, prosperous country.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You are listening to a discussion on outcome of Prime Minister's visit to Russia and China. The participants were Veena Sikri, former diplomat, Professor Anuradha Chinoy, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Manoj Tulli, AIR correspondent, and Sunil Shukla, AIR correspondent, who initiated and moderated the discussion. It came to you in the program Current Affairs, produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, news.air.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.